The ravens came to the north with their wings rimed white and their claws capped in hoarfrost, black letters bound to their legs by twine that stank faintly of cedar tar and myrish oil. John read by the hearth in the Lord's solar while winter raged against the stone, a low and ceaseless growl like a giant breathing on the other side of the wall. The letters told of storms in the smoking sea, of dead tides that moved against the wind, of a sound beneath the earth that was not the drum of hoof or hammer but a heart. They spoke of doom signs and dragon dreams, of glass candles bright as stars and geomancers drawing maps of trembling ground. They spoke of Valyria, a name like a knife drawn from an old wound. He felt it in the way the fire leaned toward him and in Ghost's low and narrowed gaze. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that the North still needed him, that a lord's duty was to the living and their bread and fire and peace. Yet he could not sleep for the heat that pooled behind his eyes, for the sudden sharpness with which ash tasted of salt and coins, for the memory of an old woman's rasp in a hall long torn down by war. When the wolf remembers he is also the dragon, the world will remember breath. At night he dreamed not of snow but of red light. He dreamed of a road that glimmered like cooled obsidian and of statues whose eyes were caves lit from within. He dreamed of a city drowned in steam and whispering stone, whose wide avenues were broken teeth and whose towers had slumped like candles. He dreamed of a ring of mountains and a storm that did not move. Always, at the end of the road, a voice that might have been a woman's or a flame's said, "Come," and another, colder, said, "Come if you dare." At first he told no one, but the ravens did not stop and neither did the dreams. The third month brought a fourth letter from Old Town, written in a hand as strong as a smith's and full of contempt for ornament. Marwyn the Mage, they called him, and he wrote as if he had long ago spent all his patience on men who believed that the world was a room with a ceiling. "My lord," the letter said, "if you are who the world thinks you are, if there is even a drop of the blood in you that snakes when it hears the word dragon, then the earth is calling and you had better not let it leave a message." "Old Town has no love for mages," Sansa told him when he showed her the seal. "If the Citadel lets a man like this write to you, it's because they fear what he's telling you is true." "What would you ask me to do?" he said. "I would ask my brother not to sail into a sea that eats iron and spits it back as smoke," she said, and the steel of her was in her eyes. "But I know what you will do." He thought he did not, until the night ghost lifted his head all at once and the flames in the hearth bent as if a great wind had pushed at them from inside the chimney. The crimson banners on the walls stirred. The air tasted of copper. When John lay down, he dreamed not of fire but of a tunnel white with frost. He walked until he came to a chamber whose walls were carved with circles and spirals that glowed pale blue, and in that chamber stood two trees grown together, one black as charcoal, one white as bone, their roots tangled in the shape of a knot. He knew somehow that the knot had once held a very great thing. A woman stood beside it with hair the color of old snow. "The doom is not only fire," she said. "It is a knot tied wrongly when the world was young, then pulled tight by greed and fear and 1,000 little songs whispered to the ground. It is an oath broken and then kept so fiercely it became a cage. It is blood that tried to make mountains kneel and mountains that learned to bleed." "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who was here when the knot was made," she said, and he thought of Nissa Nissa and of the women under the hills and of all the queens and mothers whose names had been burned to ash to warm men's egos. "Go south, wolf. Take with you ice that does not die and fire that does not sleep. Bring a horn that calls what cannot be called. Bring a song." When he woke, he remembered no face and no name, but the knot stayed with him. A tangle of roots in the shape of circles upon circles, a prison that was also a prayer. He left at dawn when the frost was blue on the yard, with Ghost at his heel and Davos Seaworth at his side, because there were only a handful of men John trusted to take him across waters where the sky wore the colors of a bruise. The Onion Knight had come whistling into Winterfell with a hold full of cod and news and the stubbornness of a man who had survived kings. He said yes as if the word had been waiting on his tongue. "I've sailed to the end of maps," Davos said, as the snow's rest stood off the white knife and the river's gray light opened into a day harsh as tin. "But I take it you aim to go where there aren't even lies about what lives there. Do you believe in curses?" John asked. I believe the ocean is big enough to hold 1,000 names for drowning, Davos said, and spat into the wind for luck. But I've seen stranger things than curses end. Sometimes it takes a knife. Sometimes it takes a word. They went first to Old Town because the letter had asked, and because John wanted what tools the Citadel could give him, even if they did not yet know they had them. Old Town smelled of river mud and beeswax and pride. The high tower cut a piece out of the sky. Men in gray moved through the Citadel like a quiet tide. They looked at John as if he were a specimen, at Davos as if he were a story. When he asked for Marwyn, they told him the man was not permitted visitors who believed in dragons. He was on the point of leaving when a boy no older than Bran had been when he shattered his leg tugged at his sleeve. You'll want the old steps, he said, with the certainty of the very young, and led them down corridors whose walls were cool to the touch and smelled faintly of chalk. In a room with no door, only an arch hung with heavy beads of carved bone, sat a man whose belly was like a wine cask and whose eyes were the sharpest John had ever seen. You took your time, said Marwyn. Sit. If you have the wolf in you, it knows how to listen. He showed John a map drawn in inks that gleamed as if wet though they were dry. It was not the shape of Essos as any lord had taught John. The smoking sea pulsed like a black flower. Lines cut across it as if someone had been sketching a spider. Faults, Marwyn said, tapping each with a nail like a little iron wedge, and chords, strings with a song running through them. The doom was not only earth. It was a sentence pronounced on a nation and the earth's way of making the sentence true. It is a spell of ownership, of fire taken and bound and forced to labor, of mountains turned slaves. The Valyrian dragon lords fed the 14 flames with words for 1,000 years until the mountains learned only the language of command. Then the mountains broke that language to end it. How do you end a sentence? Davos said. You finish it, Marwyn said, or you unmake the grammar. There are stones older than Valyria that remember what words sounded like when the world was new. There are horns carved from the bones of things the world never learned to name. There is blood, too. There is always blood. Another man stood then in the archway, tall and wiry, with a face the color of old bronze and eyes like polished wood. He wore a blade at his hip that seemed too plain for his carriage. Qohor sends its greetings, he said. We forge with prayer as well as hammer. If you mean to speak to mountains, you will need a sword that knows your voice. He bowed shallowly. I am Teamer of the Black Wall. Marwyn produced a black horn banded with pale metal that drank the light, a simply turned thing with a narrow throat. He set it beside a stone that looked like nothing at all until John realized that staring at it made his tongue feel thick. A dragon horn? John asked softly, feeling his skin tighten. A calling horn, said Marwyn, with contempt for smaller words. But it does not call beasts alone, calls answers. Blow it and you will be answered by what is bound to listen. Davos eyed the horn as he might a pot of boiling oil. What if you don't like the answer? Then don't ask the question, Marwyn said. But you will. The knot is tightening. He took John's hand, and with a blade he drew from a sleeve as if from air. He pricked John's thumb and let one dark drop fall onto the ugly stone. The drop did not spread or soak. It sat there and did not move, and in the stillness John felt something in the stone move toward it. He felt as if a dog lying under a table had raised its head when it heard a word it knew. The room smelled of summer, for an instant and then not. Marwyn bandaged John's thumb. You were asked to come, the mage said to the Lord. If you go, you will carry both a key and a lock. You will have need of both. They left with the horn wrapped in lambskin and the stone wrapped in a smell like old rain. A Qohoric swordsmith worked on the Snow's Rest deck while she cut down the mander and out past whispering sound, beating flat a braided ingot into something that would someday be Valyrian and then something not quite Valyrian at all. Teamer worked with a hammer light enough for a woman and a prayer long enough for a year. He asked for nothing but silence. When he quenched the blade, he quenched it not in water nor oil, but in salt brine taken from the river mouth while tides met and argued. John watched him shape the guard into a simple oval and the pommel into a wolf's head so stylized it was almost a mark. When he lifted it at last, it was darker than night, and the light along its edge was not color but decision. Timur named it brevity in his tongue. Davos called it spit. Jon said nothing and gave it a home on his belt. They put Dragonstone abeam on a day when the sea was the color of slate and the sky a lighter gray, and the island climbed out of both like an old dragon dragging itself from a grave. Jon stood on the foredeck while the tide turned and thought of a girl with silver hair who had died across the world, and of a boy who had been a bastard, and then a ghost, and then a lord. He thought of what he was to the world now. A man the North had decided it could love when it kept one eye always on the South. They took on water and salted pork and a priestess of R'hllor who had walked down to the jetty barefoot and smiling. She called herself Ashera, which was not her name. She carried no ruby at her throat, only a scar there like a burned kiss. Her eyes had the patient sadness of those who have once believed in a god that spoke loudly and now believe in a god that listens, if at all. She said nothing, only made a small sign when she stepped aboard. And it was not the sign of the fiery heart, but a circle intersected by another circle. Jon felt the knot's memory stir in him when she traced it with one finger on the rail. "What is it?" Davos asked. "A prayer the fire made once to the water," she said. "They were married here on these shores before any temple crowned them. They remember their vows badly now. The smoking sea lay ahead like a bruise on the world. Its air smelled of sulfur and secrets. The sky above it was the wrong blue, a blue so thick it looked like it could be scraped with a knife. As the snow's rest crossed the line where ordinary water ended, Jon felt his teeth ache and his bones vibrate very softly, as if an instrument had been plucked inside him. Ghost stood at the bow and did not growl. He leaned into the wind as if to meet a friend. They saw things that were not ships and islands that were not islands. They saw domes of yellow light rising from the sea like jellyfish before sinking again. They saw a flock of birds fly past whose wings did not move and whose shadows trailed behind them like banners. They threw overboard a length of rope and watched it coil upward of its own accord until it was stiff as a staff, then fall limp as if ashamed. Ever and again a sigh came out of the depths and the ship shivered as if someone had dragged a nail lightly along her keel. Davos laughed once, hollow, like a man making a wager with nobody. No one else laughed at all. On the fourth day in, they saw a tower. It jutted from the sea at an angle, its top sheared off, a jagged tooth. Vines the color of rust climbed it and bloomed with white flowers that seemed entirely innocent until the wind shook them and the air filled with floating seeds that glowed faintly in the dusk. Ashera burned them as they landed, one by one, with a candle whose flame had not gone out since Dragonstone. The seeds screamed too softly to hear until Jon listened with his fingertips on the rail. After that, he did not watch the flowers anymore. When at last the cone of ash that had once been a mountain shouldered its way into the sky, they realized how large it was not by sight but by silence. The sea did not splash near it. The winds did not chatter. The air hung waiting, a held breath centuries long. The ruins of Valyria ringed the land in a necklace of drowned bones. The avenues were broad and empty and lined with statues that had slumped into themselves like nobles tired of being looked at. Where buildings still stood, they leaned against one another as if conspiring. The heat of the place was not as they had expected. Not a hearth roar or a smithy's sting, but the heat of a mouth that has been speaking too long and will not close. "Drop anchor," Davos said softly, "because the voice you bring into a church is the voice you use in places the world remembers. If we're to die of folly, let us die on ground." They came ashore in a bay where the sand was black and flecked with glitter. The prints they made filled in behind them, not with water but with a thin trickle of ash that rose from the ground and settled again like snow. Felt wrong to leave tracks at all. Jon could not tell whether the ruins were watching or whether the watching he felt came from below. When he touched the earth with his palm, he felt the way a great hall feels when it is full of guests who are saying nothing because a king has just stood up. "Does it know your name?" Davos asked when Jon rose. "It knows the name I carry," Jon said. They found a road and took it because men had once built roads to lead them where they wanted to go, and even curses remember their maker's intentions. On either side lay houses whose walls retained their sheen like old bones, and whose thresholds were not worn for lack of use but untouched by it. Once, or so the mind made stories, Women had walked here with baskets and laughter, men with ink on their fingers and the smell of good metal in their hair, children with a sugared pastry crumbling in their hands. Once dragons had made shadows like moving roofs across these stones. The ghosts of those ordinary days were an ache. Near sundown on the second day of their walking, they came to a colonnade whose columns were carved with twisting shapes that were probably vines and probably serpents and probably both. Beyond lay a court whose tiles had cracked and lifted and then settled into new geometries. In the center, on an elevation of 3 steps that looked too low for importance at first glance, stood a stone table that had no marks of chisel or man. On it lay 3 objects: a shard of something that had once been a great mirror, a ring of black iron too heavy for jewelry and too small for an anchor, and a bowl of obsidian filled with water that did not reflect the sky but an unchanging pale face. Ashera breathed in very slowly. "The city kept a hand," she said, and only later did John understand what she meant. That a hand was a thing that remembered how to hold, to make, to end a thing gently. He set Marwyn's stone on the table and the horn beside it and drew spit with the simple motion of a man telling the world where his edge is. The blade's shadow did not align with the sun's. "What now?" Davos asked. "Now," said the earth. They felt it through the soles of their feet. A pulse, measured and vast, not quickened by their fear nor slowed by their awe. It was not a heart. It was the count of a promise. Ashera took the ring and set it around the bowl. She broke off a corner of the mirror shard and dropped it into the water, which did not ripple. "You have brought ice and fire and a song," she said. "Now bring them into one story." John raised the horn. His mouth was narrow. He thought of the horns men blew at harvest and war, of their brassy jests and their simple summonses. This was not that. His lips were dry. He licked them and they tasted of smoke. He set the horn to his mouth and blew. No sound came at first. Then far away a bird lifted in a city where no birds lived. Then the ground said his name once, not in the language of men. Then Ghost tilted his head and the hair along his back rose. Then the horn found its sound, and it was not one note but many, and it was not one voice but a choir. It spoke in the stripped-down grammar the world remembered before men taught mountains to kneel. Said, "Begin." The air changed. Heat rose, then fell. The shadows moved as if the sun had winked and opened its eye quickly. The silence uncoiled. From far away, then nearer, came a sound like wind being drawn through a deep cave and then released again. A low roar unspooled beneath their feet, curving round the court like a beast reluctant to show itself. They were not alone. From the column's shade emerged a woman whose skin was the color of old bronze and whose hair lay like black silk cut short. Her eyes were the pale green of old glass. She was dressed in a simple garment that left one shoulder bare. She bore herself as if she had never believed in death and had been wrong but had not had the courtesy to learn humility fro. "Emmett, who keeps my city in their mouth?" she asked, and her voice was not dust. It was rain striking copper. "No one keeps it," John said. "We have come to set it free." The smile that touched her mouth then was terrible for how much tenderness was in it. "Free," she said. "A pretty word. Who will do this freeing? The mountains? The water? The men who taught their children to teach their dragons to bow? Or you with your honest eyes?" "I am the wrong man for pride," John said, and knew it for true. "But I was asked, and there is a knot, and I have a blade and a horn and blood that might call things back to speech." She studied him. "You carry my people in your veins." "I carry many people," he said. "That is an answer and a refusal," she said, and turned to Ashera. "Priestess of a god who burned your house down to show you his love. What have you brought but a circle to set about a bowl?" "A memory of vows," Ashera said. "We unmade them by keeping them too fiercely. I would untie the knot by teaching the vows their gentleness." "And you?" the woman said to Davos, "smuggler and knight, who has loved kings and ships and the smell of onions more than any temple. What have you brought?" "A willingness to try a thing because the other choice is to do nothing," Davos said. "And if it helps, a good knife and a bad song." The woman laughed. "Once. The city remembers having both." She placed her hand on the table. The bowl's water changed. It showed a field of black stone cut by cracks that glowed a dull red like coals half smothered. It showed men in robes standing in a circle and chanting while a dragon lay with its neck outstretched, captive and patient as a plow horse. It showed a child with hair like bronze kissing the dragon's eye and the dragon closing it like a door. It showed the mountains as they had been before men taught them words and after. "We bound the 14, she said. Not with shame, but with the candor of a queen speaking a hard law that had been necessary until it wasn't. It was a system. It fed our forges and carried our bridges. It sang to our brick and breathed for our glass. It made our baths hot and our knives true. Each year we bound them more tightly. Each year we spoke more words, and the mountains spoke fewer until the only words they had left were no and enough." "The doom," John said, tasting the ash on the word. "The correction," she said. "A sentence we made too long and a grammar the earth broke in self-defense. We live in the part after the slash where a scribe has tried to put the phrase right." "How do we unmake it?" John asked. "We do not unmake what happened," said Ashera, and John heard in her the hush of the white cave, the circles within circles. "We teach the mountains a different song and teach men to listen to it and not try to make it theirs." "That is a fine sermon," Davos said. "But the world has its own habits." "The habit of life is the strongest one," the woman said. "There is a way. It will hurt. It will cost." "It always does," John said. "Then come," she said, and turned away so that the setting sun lit her profile with the old authority of coins. The knot lies under Varos, where men who had never used a shovel in their lives told the earth what shape it must take, and the earth obeyed until it learned how to lie to them. They went at dawn, their first true dawn in a place where the light had seemed until now a counterfeit minted by craftsmen who cared too much for detail and too little for mercy. The path climbed and dipped and led them through streets no one had swept for centuries that were nonetheless strangely clean, as if ash had learned courtesy. They crossed bridges still strong and arches still proud and squares where weeds had sprung up in geometric patterns as if obeying an old plan. At the city's edge, the road angled toward a range of mountains disguised as a single mountain and folded so deeply into itself that it seemed a braid of stone. Steam wandered from its flanks in the morning like cattle. At the foot of a slope cut by stairs so old their edges had learned patience stood a gate forged of metal so dark it ate light and decorated with scenes so intricately rendered their outlines seemed to change when looked at too long. John saw men whispering into fissures and women slicing their palms to let blood fall into cisterns and dragons walking humble as milk cows in nurseries. He put his palm to the gate's cold and felt behind it something that was not heat but potential. The woman placed her hand where his had been and sang a note so low it might have been mistaken for a sigh. The gate opened as if embarrassed to have been so obvious. A stairway plunged inward. They went down into the groaning earth, Davos with a lantern whose flame bent and straightened as if bracing itself, Ashera with her candle that had once been a temple's heart, John with the horn wrapped in its lambskin and the ugly stone in a leather sack and the sword on his hip that had been a promise the day it was named. Ghost padded ahead, silent as a thought meant for no one else. It was not heat that greeted them but the absence of cold. It was not darkness but a consideration of light. The tunnel walls were glass in places, rippled like poured honey, and rough stone in others, napped by pressure. Where the stair ended a hall began, lined with pillars narrow as bones that held up an impossible weight as easily as a hand holds a light cup. Along the hall's length the floor bowed very slightly toward the center as if it had melted and then decided to be floor again. In the center ran a ribbon of black water so thin it made no sound. "Question it cannot answer with what we taught it," she replied, and John understood suddenly the shape of the task not as a ritual but as a conversation. The mountain had a memory. It had been listed to and commanded, entreated and abused. To free it was to persuade it to remain whole when all its lessons said break. They came to a chamber where the hall widened and the ribbon of water pooled before sliding under a lip of stone. On a dais of a single slab rested a wheel of metal the color of smoke. Atop the wheel sat a cage woven from bands of the same metal. Inside that sat a stone like the one John carried, except so large an ox would have strained to drag it. Ashera drew circles in the ash with her finger. One large circle around the dais, then a smaller one on its surface, then another, each intersecting the next. "The vows," she said. "We will not break them. We will give them back their first intention." "What must I do?" John asked, and the woman looked at him as if he had asked whether day followed night. "Bleed," she said. "Speak, refuse, accept. You will say no to the binding and yes to the relationship." "Is that all?" Davos muttered. "Someone must blow the horn," Ashera said. "Someone with a voice the mountain will think worth answering. Someone who has been a king and refused it, and been a dead man and refused that too." John took off the lambskin. The horn lay in his hands like a sleeping snake. The room was a hush so complete that the hairs on his neck felt each other lean closer. He raised the horn and breathed in once, felt ash coat his lips, tasted iron and something like cinnamon, and then blew. The first sound was a tone he felt in his bones and in the heels of his hands, a note like the shape of the mountain itself. The second was a higher thread that ran through it and oscillated, finding and leaving a home, like a swallow's flight. The third was an undertone that could not be heard so much as forgiven. The chord above the water brightened. The wheel on the dais quivered. The great stone within its cage did not move, but John felt it lean. He spoke then because the mountain would not understand silence. "You have been used," he said. "You have been given orders like a dog and punished like a god. We have called you ours. We have called you resource. We have called you machine. I call you neighbor." The earth answered with a tremor so delicate it might have been an eyelid flutter. The horn's note deepened. Ashera sang a line that rose and fell in an old mode and placed her blood on each of the circles. Davos stood with his lantern steady as judgment and added his voice to Ashera's in a sailor's long note that held the horizon in it. The woman, who was not a woman at all in that moment but the city's recollection of itself, touched John's wrist and guided his sword hand toward the wheel. "If you cut this, it will break," she said. "If you do not cut it, it will break. Do you understand?" He did. A knot pulled too tight can be broken by tugging or by patience. To untie it, you need both. He set the blade lightly against the smoke-colored metal and pressed not with his arm but with the memory in his blood of a man who had died and returned and refused to be king and had loved a red-haired girl and a rival and a country. The blade sang, a pure line that made the hair in his nose stand up. "Ask," Ashera said. "Will you stop counting?" John asked the mountain. "No," said the earth with no malice. Counting was how it lived now. "Will you count differently?" The pause that followed was the longest thing in his life. He filled it with breath and with another note on the horn, higher and more vulnerable. Ashera moved her candle in a small circle and murmured something like an apology. Davos reached into the pool with the tip of his knife and drew a little compass rose on the surface whose points did not collapse at once. "Yes," said the mountain at last, curiously. "Yes, if you will listen with me." "I will," John said, and the weight behind the word was not his alone. In that moment he understood what it meant to carry a world. Not to bear it like Atlas and suffer, but to consent to be in conversation with it every hour. He set spit and the horn and his bloody hand and his unbloody heart on the dais and breathed into the room the longest breath he had. "I will," he said again, and the metal of the wheel softened, not with heat but with attention. The cage slackened. The great stone shifted in its seat. The cords red paled and then steadied into an amber like beeswax. The water ran thinner and then thicker and then laughed, a sound as small as a boy's whisper. The tremor in the floor line shivered and turned. The wheel fell in on itself until it was a ring, then a hook, then nothing at all that could hold anything against its will. Ashera was weeping and laughing. John could not tell which, and neither could she. Davos lowered his lantern and blew out its flame, and for a wild instant the only light was the candle and the cord and the eyes of the city's memory, which were brighter than lamps. "It is done," the woman said. "It is begun." They slept that night on stone that was less unfriendly than before, and John dreamed of roots loosening their fists and of a tunnel under ice that no longer needed to be a tunnel. He woke to a sound like rain in a far room. When they climbed out of the mountain into day, the air did not taste sweeter exactly, but it tasted like something that had stopped pretending to be something else. Valyria did not rise from the sea and set itself on its feet and begin to walk. No city does. But the ash that had hung like a sullen curtain now moved in a breeze that came from someplace other than the cave mouth. The domes shone not with confrontation, but with the resilience of a thing that has survived humiliation. In the streets, weeds rearranged themselves with more confidence. In the distance, the angle of a fallen tower made a little more sense, as if its collapse had finally slipped into the story it belonged to. And then came the dragons. They were not a host. They were not a tide. They were 3, then 4, then 2, then 5, their number changing because some circles are counted by memory, not eyes. They were small, the largest no bigger than the longboat, with wings that stitched the air and eyes that knew the color of fire. They were not tame. They were not wild. They were instruments being tuned. Ghost stood unafraid while one dropped to a parapet and watched them as if they were a puzzle to be solved with patience instead of teeth. Ashera held up her hand and spoke 3 words in a language that was neither High Valyrian nor the rough tongue of the free cities nor the old songs of Ashai, and the dragon blinked slowly in acknowledgement because words spoken without the desire to own travel better than edicts. Jon felt the horn grow warm at his hip. He did not blow it. He lifted it and turned it once in his hands and then set it on the parapet. The dragon came close. His nostrils flared. It touched the horn with the edge of one nostril and pulled back. Then it put its eye to Jon's and did not look away. He did not know how to tell it what he had done or what he hoped. He lowered his gaze, courtesy, not submission, and extended his hand, palm up, the way you tell a hound you come with open fingers. They built a simple altar on a platform where a dragon had once died in harness and left on it not gold or incense but the horn, which had done its work and did not need to call again. They set a small garden in the center of a square and planted in it a fig sapling and a thorn bush and a pale blue flower that only opened at dawn. Word traveled outward along the channels men have always used. The brag of sailors, the careful letters of scholars, the sudden songs of priests, the quiet nods of merchants. Cohor sent smiths with questions. Volantis sent priests with grievances. Bravos sent an envoy with a contract and a child's curiosity poorly hidden behind a banker's mask. The Dothraki circled the sea and declared that since the mountains had learned to bend and not break, perhaps men could too. It was chaos and it was hope. Jon sent ravens of his own. He wrote with a hand steadier than it had been when he took ship from the north. He told Sansa that the sea had not eaten him and that if the north could spare grain when the ashfields proved hungry, Valyria would send back glass that cuts true and coins struck not with dragons cursing but with mountains listening. He told her that Ghost had learned the smell of a dragon's laugh. He could have stayed and the city would have let him. It would have made him a walk in the evenings when the stone was warm. It would have given him a house whose steps looked out on a courtyard with a crooked tree where the wind told stories. It would have given him work that did not end. But there is a way the north takes hold of a man's lungs and does not release them even when he stands under a sun that does not know winter's tricks. On the morning they departed, as the snow's rest found a wind that had learned a new route, a dragon flew just above the water, keeping pace with the ship. It looked at Jon once and then looked away, because it trusted him enough not to need his eyes. The city receded slowly, not because the ship was slow, but because a place that has been a wound does not like to become a scar and prefers to remain visible long enough to be remembered. When at last the horizon took it, the sea changed its color, becoming once more merely deep and merely wide and full of honest dangers. What will they call it? Davos asked as they reached Salt, where men could speak without their words tasting of old oaths. Not the doom, Ashera said. Not anymore. A correction, she mused. A conversation. A vow remade. They won't sing about the listening, Davos said. They'll sing about the man who came with a sword and a horn and a wolf and told the mountain how to behave. They can sing as they like, Jon said, and it surprised him to find that the old inward flinch, the one that came whenever someone tried to turn him into a story, had softened. He thought of the city and of the knot and of the winter that still waited for him as a house waits for its master's feet on the stair. So long as they also plant fig trees and leave their wells unchained. Back in the north, spring came cautiously as if testing whether it had been invited. The snow pulled back its fingers. The rivers remembered how to sing without EFF. Ot. Ravens brought letters that smelled of strange ash and new contracts and iron forged without cruelty. Men who had lost sons to the sea sent daughters to learn from the smiths of the Black Wall who had come to ask questions and stayed to teach. The small folk in their fields spoke of dragons in the same tone they used for weather and taxes. The mountains in the north listened too, as mountains do, learning the new grammar a little at a time and mistrusting it and then trying it again. At night John sometimes dreamed of the woman with bronze skin and green eyes, and in some dreams she had Sansa's voice, and in others Lyanna's, and in others no voice at all, only the city's. Sometimes he dreamed of the cord, glowing quietly over water that ran in obedience to no man. Sometimes he dreamed of a child with hair like bronze kissing a dragon's eye and the dragon closing it with the softness of trust. These dreams made him wake with a small ache that had nothing to do with regret and everything to do with tenderness for a world that had learned to say please. The horn slept forever on its altar in the square where men once did cruel arithmetic with life. The fig tree put out leaves like open hands. The thorn bush bloomed with a harsh beauty and then with fruits that the children learned to eat by careful degrees. The blue flower opened at dawn for a little while and then closed, reminding anyone who cared to notice that all grace is a rhythm. And under the mountains of Valyria, the counting changed. It was no longer the count of orders obeyed and resentments hoarded. It was the count of breaths shared. It was the count of small eruptions that fed the fields, of channels that carried warmth without ownership, of cracks that released their pressure before they needed to scream. It was the count of a sentence becoming a poem. One autumn, some years after the first of the new glass had been set in northern windows, John stood on the battlements at dusk and looked south long enough that the guards began to shift their weight and wonder whether he saw a ship. He did not. What he saw was the knowledge that the world had not ended where men had once taken it to the edge to dangle their feet and boast. He saw a cord stretched over water and a city that had learned to need what it loved without breaking it. Sansa came to stand beside him, all red hair subdued by the light and cleverness softened by contentment. "Thinking of your mountains?" she asked, half smiling. "Of our neighbors," John said. He told her then about the blue flower and the fig tree and the horn that was now only a story and a temptation refused. He told her about a dragon that had rested its head in his palm with the weight of a promise, and about a woman who had been a city speaking through a tongue she borrowed for an hour. He told her that he had learned that the world's oldest bindings were not chains but words, and that the gentlest way to break them was to learn to speak differently. "That is a king's work," Sansa said, not teasing. "The kind you always knew how to do and never wanted." He laughed, quietly. The sound traveled a little way and then stayed near, content. "It is everyone's work," he said, "and it begins with the small things. A well without a lock. A tree planted for someone else's shade. A mountain you listen to instead of making count for you." "And what will you do next?" she asked. "Tomorrow." He nodded toward the training yard where boys were trying to be men in exactly the clumsy way men have always begun. "I will break up a fight before it turns into a grudge. I will teach a boy how to hold a sword so that he and the sword both last longer. I will send a letter to a smith in Qohor asking why a blade should be quenched in brine when the tide is turning. And then I will sit under a tree and listen to what the wind is arguing with the leaves." Sansa slipped her hand into his arm. "I think," she said, "that the world is very slightly better for your having gone and come back." He thought of the knot in the cave of ice and the knot under the mountain and the way both had loosened when someone had said please and meant it. He thought of the sea's new paths across the smoking sea, marked by fishermen with bits of cloth tied to poles, by traders with ink and pride, by priests with hymns that sounded less like threats. He thought of dragon shadows drifting above squares where children tossed stones to see how far they would skip. He thought of ghosts that had learned to be ancestors. He watched the light go out of the sky and felt something at last unclench in himself that had clenched when he was a boy watching crows with blood on their beaks and learning the difference between honor and stories. The world did not need him to be a king. It needed him to be in it, listening. Far to the south, where a city used to be and now was, a dragon glided across a cord of light that hummed softly over water. It opened its mouth once, not to roar but to answer a note so deep it was almost mercy. In the courts, the fig leaves turned their faces to the night, and the blue flower closed, and the thorn kept its counsel. And under the mountain the counting went on by choice. Winter's last teeth loosened from the fields, and the ground broke into the rough grin of spring. Men went out with their spades and songs, and when the stones they turned shone with flecks of black glass, they swore mildly instead of crossing themselves and muttering about old burning. The stories had traveled faster than any raven and grown less gaudy as they went. By the time they reached the smallest of the villages at the world's edge, the tale had shed its horn and its sorcery like a snake shedding skin and kept the part that mattered. A promise to ask the earth for partnership rather than permission. A girl in a hamlet beyond Last Hearth dug a little channel from the stream to a patch of stubborn ground, lined it with flat stones warmed by afternoon sun, and found her cabbage heads larger than her father's. It would be told later that she had learned from Valyria. In truth, she had learned from the way new words feel in the mouth. Trade came north along the coasts, in low-bellied ships packed with glass panes that did not warp faces into ugliness, with ingots that took an edge without whining, with pots that kept a stew warm overnight near a hearth and never scorched unless one was neglectful. Along with these came questions. Did the mountains under the north wish to be sung to also? Would the north sell timber not as plunder but as the beginning of an exchange? Could a woman from the shadow of the Black Wall marry a riverman in White Harbor and teach children to draw circles that meant please? The first troubles arrived disguised as courtesy. A narrow-hipped man from Volantis presented himself at Winterfell with his hair oiled and his robes embroidered stiff with the fiery heart and his mouth already busy arranging debts. Behind him were 4 boys with expensive swords and no scars, and a priest old enough to have seen 3 waves of fashion and lived to be unimpressed by them. They were lodged in a south-facing tower and fed good stew and honest bread. They smiled as if the food were a speech crafted in their honor. At supper, the narrow-hipped man, he called himself Meneros, cleared his throat with the deliberateness of a judge. Volantis sends warm congratulations on your lord's successful tour of the Smoking Sea, he announced, in a voice that had been taught to fill rooms. We applaud any efforts to make that region safe for honest trade again, and to sanctify the natural order as the Lord of Light intends. Sansa did not blink. I have never known the natural order to be improved by sanctification, she said. But our table offers salt and courtesy to your party, so long as they are guests in our hall. A subtle joke, Meneros said, smiling as if at a child. Salt, brine, horns. One hears such things in the plazas. Our compliments as well on your hospitality to the unfortunates from the east, smiths and the like, who, lacking a city loyal enough to sponsor them, have been seeking houses for their crafts. Davos, sitting not quite at Jon's right but somewhere in his vicinity, set his spoon down. I thought Volantis called itself loyal to anything that looked at it, he said. When did you begin to mind where a smith placed his anvil? We mind, Meneros said, and the gloss fell from his voice for an instant. When shares are not honored, when others profit from what Volantis has achieved by its own sweat and holy zeal, who first sent priests to the Smoking Sea to catalog its impurities, who built tide houses on the black sand to test its alchemy, who sent boys to bind mountains as if they were oxen? Ashera asked mildly, from the far end of the table where she had been speaking with the old priest as if they were cousins whose feud had become tiresome to all but their pride. Who taught a people to call fire theirs and then wept when fire broke their fences? You poured oil on the old grammar and called it perfume. Meneros's jaw worked. Our concern, he said, is solely with the safety of souls. And tariffs, Davos said. And renown, Sansa added. And making the world behave as Volantis prefers when it looks in a mirror, Ashera murmured. Jon let their words sit in the air like chessmen set down one by one, and when Meneros turned at last toward him with the practiced flourish of a rhetorician approaching his final, inevitable question, Jon simply asked, What is it you want? To ensure, Meneros said, leaning forward, that this listening is conducted under the guidance of those who have long served the flame, that untrained hands do not meddle with cords and stones, that the proper sacrifices be offered, that, Unauthorized cults are not permitted to sprawl across the world like ivy and choke the trees. The cords do not answer to you, John said, nor to me. They answer to the mountain and to those who speak without the desire to own. You are free to go to Valyria and ask it to be yours. It will tell you no. If you wish to pray, pray. If you wish to build a bathhouse, build one. If you wish to take 1/10 of my people's bread to send back to your altars, you will find our hearths uncooperative. Meneros smiled again, too quickly. There are ways to encourage cooperation, he said, lightly as a man flicking a gnat. He did not know the way Sansa's eyes hardened when she decided a guest had finished his meal. He did not know that Davos would, in the months following, learn the strengths and weaknesses of every merchant prince's line of credit and then teach smallholders how to make the knowledge useful. He did not know about the letters already sent to White Harbor, to Old Town, to Skagos, wherein John had written, "We are to be asked for permission to be polite. We shall decline." The Volantene party left in the thaw with 7 trunks of gifts unopened and learned, to their surprise, that the roads of the north had stones which disliked being spat upon. Bravo sent no priests, only a woman with hair iron gray and eyes that counted, and beside her a boy who did not speak and whose gaze never left the floor. The woman said nothing politic and asked to see the contracts. Davos spent a week with her in a strain of cordiality so pure it might have soured butter, and at the end of it she pronounced the arrangements fair. "Too fair," she said. "We like to take a little more than we deserve. It greases the engines, but we shall adjust to honesty where unavoidable." The boy, on the last day, raised his face to look at Ghost, who happened to be standing there by accident and who bent slowly and put his nose to the boy's hair in benediction. No contract was signed for that, and no one doubted it was the most important exchange made that month. The first true danger announced itself without letter or envoy. It came as a rumor among the Kohoric, carried in their evening songs and the way they tapped their hammers 3 times before resting them. There were men forming in the east under a banner of blackened iron, calling themselves the Keepers of the 14. They were smiths and scholars and fanatics and fathers of dead sons and daughters who had died in the forges and forges that had died in their daughters' lungs. They did not worship fire. They worshipped the memory of control. To them, the correction had been an insult. The earth had been theirs. It had betrayed them. Their priests, the keepers, refused that word, called them tutors instead, spoke of grammar and dominion, of the pride of men being the world's natural pivot. They began in Lys, in a cellar where a few men spoke too loudly and were not asked to leave. They found coin in Myr and anger in Tyria, men to swing hammers in Norvos and boys to boil glass in Pentos. Their first act beyond word was small and went unnoticed. They erected a little cage around a little stone in a hillside far from any city and taught it to hold a trickle of warmth beyond sunset. Then they caged another stone and dared it to break. Then one of their tutors sang a song that was almost right but not gentle, and a hillside answered with a sound that was almost a laugh and dropped a boulder on the tutor and broke his legs. They declared him martyr and themselves encouraged. What is a boulder to an idea? Ashera felt them before word reached her. She had begun to keep a little altar in the god's wood, not to any god but to the practice of making a shape that tells your heart where to stay. She hung in the branches little circles made of willow whips, and in winter tied to them blue ribbon from Sansa's stores. One morning she took down all the ribbons and burned them one by one, a ceremony without witnesses. "They are trying to make the vow jealous," she said to John. "They are whispering in its ear about fidelity and obedience, as if love were a widow who had lost her sense." "What do they want?" John asked. "They want," she said, with no bitterness and no pity, "to be necessary in the way tyrants think necessity excuses them. They want to hold the handle of the world's kettle and pour what is hot into their own cups according to their thirst." Davos, when told, spat and sharpened his knife on his quiet anger. "They want to sell warmth," he said. "They'll offer safety. They'll promise to keep the mountains on a leash so there are no surprises. Men who fear their children fear surprise most of all." "What do we do?" Sansa asked. "We make surprises gentle," Ashera said. "We make them frequent and small so men stop thinking all surprises carry knives." Then she looked at John. And then we go south where the ground is being taught to obey, and we ask it to remember how to converse. They went, John, Davos, Ashera. Timur, who had been forging in White Harbor and had discovered the North's weather could make prayer a necessity rather than a habit. 7 others whose names mattered only to the people who would miss them if they did not return. They took with them no horn. The horn slept on its altar and would have shattered like spun sugar if a hand had lied and tried to lift it now. They took instead a new blade from Timur's hands, sister to spit, named Listener, whose edge was shorter and whose spine carried shallow grooves like the ribs of a shell, to catch song. They sailed in a ship that had learned the routes of the smoking sea by asking politely, a ship that knew how to wait just off a line in the water until a line in the air walked over to meet it. The sky was no longer a bruise. It was attending. They made Dragonstone by habit and gratitude and took on water and a boy with a face too young for his eyes who asked to come because he had dreamed of a knot and of a white cave that smelled of wet stone and wanted to see its cousin under a mountain. His name was Maesterless. He had stitched a crow onto his sleeve because he liked how they watched and was tired of men with chains telling him when to think. Valyria greeted them not like a queen, but like a field where friends had sown together and now met to see what had taken root. The fig tree's leaves had grown shiny and the thorn bush carried berries like little drops of dried blood. The blue flower in the morning opened as if to speak and closed at noon with the dignity of someone leaving a party at the right time. The square was not crowded, but it was inhabited. 10 men laying stones for a bathhouse, 3 women teaching geometry to a child whose hair was a tangle and whose questions were worse, a dragon watching from a roof and preening under the pretense of indifference. They rested one night and told none of them where they were going. Ashera laid her palm briefly on the horn as a woman might lay her hand on a horse's flank before leaving it in a safe pasture. The first cage they found was in Norvos, 3 days up the river, under a hill that had been named for a god who never visited and had not minded. It was beautifully made, which was almost more offense than if it had been crude. Iron so dark it was almost midnight had been bent into a lattice that looked like vines, and there were little flowers of metal at the joins. Inside, a stone the size of a loaf of bread sat with the patience of things that do not understand the passage of time. Ashera stood above it and hummed. "They are not fools," she said. "The song is good. It lacks only refusal." "What do you mean to do?" Davos asked, though he knew. "What you do when a boy in your crew learns to tie a knot he is too proud of," Ashera said. She took Listener from John and touched its grooved spine to the lattice. "You untie it in front of him, and then you tie it again, and then you untie it while talking about bread and whether so that pride tires of itself and remembers skill began in service." The tutors were not far. They had expected to return the following day to praise their work and teach a new verse. They came at dawn with 10 men and 1 woman, all armed with the authority of the recently righteous. The woman wore her hair scraped back and her mouth was so tightly drawn it might have cut thread. The men spread out in a half circle, as if to witness and to block escape both. "You trespass," one of them said. "This ground has been sanctified." "Not yet," said Ashera without rancor, and brushed her fingers along the lattice, sighed just audibly. "It is only anxious." "We will teach it calm," the woman declared. "We have worked out the arithmetics you helots discarded. We have measured the vowel lengths in the old bindings. You left us a city of wreckage. We will make a civilization. You will make a rulebook," Davos said, "and stomp on anyone who refuses to memorize it." The woman's eyes flicked to him, then to John. She knew him. They had drawn his face 100 times on 100 pieces of poor vellum while speaking of arrogance and dangerous precedent. "You," she said, "you turned a madness into a fashion." "I asked a mountain not to break," John said. "You undermined an order that kept men safe," she replied. "It kept some men comfortable," he said. "It killed others slowly. It trained boys to be proud of cruelty. It made listening into a sin." She took a step forward, and there in the half-light of morning the cords of her neck looked like bowstrings. The cord answers to a clear command. "Yours is a muddle that will end in fire. Fire will come whether commanded or invited," Ashera said. "The difference is whether it leaves the house when asked." The tutors moved as one, as men drilled by a single thought will move. They drew blades that had never been near a forge that mattered. Timur shifted and slid listener back to John with a motion neat as a seal diving. Ghost, who had been lying in the grass as if idly wishing to be told a story, rose and was suddenly not domestic at all. The child Maesterless was nowhere, and then there he was on the hill behind them, arms held out slightly as if balancing on a rope only he could see. "No blood," John said, and it did not occur to anyone to ask whether he meant his men's or theirs. "Then they'll give you theirs," Davos muttered. They did not. The woman, a tutor of tutors it proved, stepped up to the lattice without fear, touched it, and spoke in a tone between command and prayer. The lattice tightened. The stone inside shivered heavily, a dog trying the first shudder of a shake after bathing. The ground answered with a grumble like an old man whose stew has been oversalted. Asherah lifted her hands, 2 circles made with thumbs and forefingers, and sang a single line that was not a song and not a song. John set listeners flat to the lattice and let the grooves catch the tone. The iron relaxed a fraction. He put his mouth to the metal and said within it, as if into a cup, "No one owns you. We keep you safe," the tutor whispered to the stone, and the stone did not understand. "No," John said to the stone. "We keep ourselves safe by keeping you company." The lattice had been forged with skill. It had also been forged with certainty. Certainty has seams. Listener found them like rain finds the lines in mortar, and slipped along them with such patience that the iron could not help thinking perhaps this was what it had been made to do. The tutors knew it when they saw the first band sag. The woman cried out, not in grief but in fury that her grammar had been interrupted. "You will break the world," she said. "We will loose it," Asherah replied. "It will go on as it was meant to." The stone, freed, did not roll or leap. It sat, chastened by attention. The ground in a circle of 20 paces relaxed the way a jaw unclenches after a hard opinion. The tutors retreated in order, one by one, as professional soldiers will when pulled back by a hand at the top of the chain. The woman did not go. She studied John, and he saw in her a life that had taught her false safety and false danger and left her hungry for a world that would do as it was told. "What will they sing of you in 50 years? She asked, almost gently. "If they sing at all," John said, "I hope it is of fig trees and of boys learning how to fight without making enemies of their friends." "They will sing about the horn," she said, "because men prefer simple shapes to complicated mercies." She looked at the ground. "They will say you commanded mountains and mountains obeyed." "They will be wrong," he said. "They will make you a tyrant to warn others off mercy," she said, "because mercy frightens men who fear the mess of it." She straightened. "I will not stop. I will go to another hill and tie another knot and make it hold. I will teach the mountain that I love it more than you do because I am willing to break it for its good." John did not see her again that month. He heard of her often. She taught tutors who were not priests and boys who were not cruel and women who had found no place to lay their ambition. She made cages beautiful. She made poems out of iron that moved the faithful to tears. She failed and sometimes succeeded for a day or 3, and each success sung in her spine until it drowned out the listening. And then the next morning she had to begin again because the mountain refused to be flattering, and she asked herself, awake at last, whether this was what love was supposed to feel like. The campaign that followed did not have a name. It did not have banners. It had maps that changed every morning and a list in John's hand of places rumored to have cages, and a second list in Asherah's hand of places that did not yet but soon might because men love to repeat what has made noise near them. They went to Mir and Pentos, to the feet of the mountains of the Morn and the slopes above Tyrosh, to a little island nobody had thought about before that had discovered it could warm a bath with its own quartz and was very proud and very frightened when the warmth waxed in the night. Most places received them like rain after a long dry spell. A few threw stones. In one, a boy with his hair grown long to hide the chain he had cut from his neck called John Traitor and Asherah Witch and Davos Fool, and they smiled and took his words into their stores because some insults are good reminders. Timur spoke little, forged much. He taught smiths to build stoves that breathed without complaining and to quench at turning tide and to consider whether a hinge might like a different metal for its pin. The first time he showed a man in Norvos how to bend iron slowly and with listening rather than with triumph, the man cried, "I thought I was to be master," he said. "I did not know I was to be partner." He went home that night and set his cup down softly so as not to startle it. The dragons watched. They did not intervene. They had learned that men and mountains require the courtesy of their own conversations. Sometimes, at night, John would wake to the whisper shudder of great wings and see a shadow cross a cord of amber light where warmth was being carried like a story along a channel. Sometimes, near dawn, a dragon would be found sleeping in a roofless hall as if in a cradle, and the men of the city would wake their children quietly and show them how to walk slowly and watch a god be ordinary. News came, as it inevitably does, tied to profit and pride. Bravos brokered a pact that required no kneeling. Lys craftily stamped its pride on a new modest coin. Volantis frowned and found its frown costlier than it had planned. In Qohor, an apprentice tried to bind a breath to a bloom and walked out of the forge with a lily that opened only when a story was told nearby and closed when men spoke in numbers alone. A woman in White Harbor made a little stove no bigger than her hand, lined with the ground dust of black glass and clay, and sent it to her sister in a cold farm to keep under her blanket. A tutor made a cage of such exquisite grace that even Ashera caught her breath, and then the ground under it chose to move 2 inches sideways in the night for reasons no song could have stopped. And the iron woke with a broken heart, and the tutor learned for the first time that grief and humility can be twins. Could not all be small. Twice, the earth declared itself with a voice as large as godhood. Once in Valyria itself, not far from the new baths, a flank of Varos shrugged and shook, and a plume rose that could be seen from a league at sea. The plume did not become a roar, poured fire like a libation. The people of the square came out and stood in their bare feet and did not flee. Children clapped until their palms were pink. The fig tree did not drop a leaf. The city breathed, and afterward the baths were warmer by 2 degrees and stayed that way all winter without any man feeding their channels a grain of coal. The second time was in Tyrosh, where a careless tutor had taught a poor cliff to count, and the cliff, terrified, cried out. Rocks fell. Men died. 3 of them, one a boy the age of Maesterless, one a smuggler who had never learned to trust charts, one a mother who had been arguing with her daughter about how much salt should go in the bread. They wrapped the dead in cloth dyed blue because their families said it was a color that comforted the eye when the heart could not be, and they lowered them into ground that this time did not shake. The tutor who had erred did not run. He stood among those who mourned, gray with the shock of shoulders that realize, and Ashera took his face in her hands and pressed her forehead to his. "You will spend your life making small mercies," she said. "You will never be forgiven by the part of you that clings to being right. You will teach anyway." John did not come home when first he longed to. He told himself the work asked it of him. Perhaps it did. He told himself a letter would carry him home for a night. He told himself there were no kings in this story, only neighbors. At night, when sleep slipped and refused to be caught, he walked and listened. Once he found the tutor of tutors on a hill north of Norvos, sitting with her heels hooked on a rock, looking at a river with the fury of a woman in love with a man who would not stop taking the long way around the room to get to her. "I will never persuade it," she said without turning. "You may," he said, "but not if persuading is only a sweeter word for forcing." "Force is what children understand," she said. "I have taught men who were born old, and I have taught mountains who were born child. I prefer the mountains." He sat beside her, not close and not far. They watched swifts cut the air and return to holes in the cliff. "My father," she said finally, "was a man who thought prayers could be hammered into any shape. He broke everything that did not resemble him. He did not break me. That is why I became him. I thought someone must be a boundary. I thought love needed walls to be worth anything." "Love needs memory," John said, "and courage, and little daily deaths." She said very quietly, "What do you know of it?" "I have died," he said. "I have forgotten. I have loved. I am learning." She laughed, not unkindly. "And now you will redeem me with a sentence so simple I will be ashamed to have ever been complicated." She shook her head. Go away. If you stay, I will either hate you or follow you. I have been full of both. He went because mercy is not always staying. At White Harbor, letters waited. Sansa's hand was steady, her wit sharp. The new bathhouse had been built and trusted. There had been one scalding and 3 cold mornings mended with blankets. A glassblower from Valyria had married a fisherman's daughter, and the city had thrown a wedding where men from 3 languages danced badly together and learned to enjoy it. Arya had sent no letter and then one with 3 words. Come see me. The sea. Hild in a hamlet beyond Last Hearth had coaxed a cabbage from the ground so huge it had to be rolled down the slope to be brought to table, and all summer-long neighbors told jokes about dragons eating greens and being very polite about it. He went to see Arya. She met him outside a town that had not had a name when last they had passed this way together, and now called itself 3 Hurdles because the road there ran over 3 wooden frames set in the stream, and if you knew, you could cross dry. She wore her hair bound back in a way that looked careless and was not. She moved like a thought too quick for speaking. When she embraced him, it was like an arrow turning aside at the last instant so as not to pierce the target. She smelled of horse and rain and a little of metal. She did not say, "You look tired." She said, "You're thinner, so I forgive you for sending men to write laws." "I haven't written laws," he said. "You have," she said and smiled. "You just used water to do it. I like this better. Laws that flow around ankles make men step carefully." They walked. She told him small things that mattered. There had been a winter where boys had turned cruel, and then a spring where they had grown ashamed and apologized with gifts of rabbit and knives filed down into spoons. There had been a woman who had gone to sea because she dreamed of a mountain and come home depressed because she had found it and it had not paid her any attention. There had been a town where a girl painted circles on doors for luck and then sold lucky bread and then realized that at that rate luck would become a business and stopped. There were rumors of a man in the Riverlands who had taken much of the old grammar and removed the cruelty and saved a village from a flood with a song that was not a command but a choreography. Arya had gone to hear him. He had not been home. "You will run out of mountains," she said. "I hope to," he said. "I hope for a day when I am called to a doorstep because a pipe is squealing and not because the ground is afraid." "You may get it," she said. "And then you will be bored, and this," she gestured, the encompassing sign of a girl who had learned the breadth of the world, "will be given to men who like to bend iron. Are you content to be bored?" He thought of fig trees and cabbage heads and small stoves and a boy whose hair ghost had blessed. "I am content to be ordinary," he said. "That is not what I asked," she said, and then she smiled again, as if she had decided not to bully him. "There are men in the south who think Valyria will be a banner under which they might march. Will you go and tell them a city is not a horse?" "If I must," he said. "Or you could send Sansa," she said. "Or you could send Ghost." He laughed. It was easy with her. "Perhaps Ghost," he said. "He understands banners." They parted with the understanding that they would meet again when the world chose and not before. He went south again and farther this time, not to the smoking sea but to cities warmer and pettier and therefore more dangerous. Men there wanted to own what they called sacred so that they could sell an echo of it for a price. Women there had been keeping their cities orderly while men played, and did not care to have their kitchens and ledgers rearranged by a fashion for mercy that would leave them with the same burdens merely dressed in softer words. He learned how to talk to them without lying. He learned to admit when his listening had been convenient rather than real. A new thing came out of Karth then, as if an old debt had been remembered and decided upon at last. A cabal of men with rings too heavy for their fingers declared that they had never embraced the Valyrian grammar and had no intention of beginning now. They had made their fortunes in spices and in persuading men their wives were less beautiful than their neighbors' wives, and the idea of partnering with mountains offended them aesthetically. They sent mercenaries to Valyria, equipped not with faith but with numbers and metal, to seize the baths and the new channels and any dragon that would mistake a net for a toy. The mercenaries reached the new bathhouse at the edge of Varos, where women were washing their hair and telling each other stories in 3 languages at once. They set their nets and their fires and their stakes. the first dragon to drop from the sky to see what the noise was lifted again with webs pulling at his ankles and tore himself free with a cry like a table split down the center. The second came not because of noise but because the first had cried, and scattered the men like a wind. The third did not come because dragons are not fools. Men died and men ran. Asherah went to the bathhouse and washed blood off the steps with a bucket and an old rag, humming, and the women helped. And then they finished their washing and went home and made dinner with salt enough to please their mothers. The Carthene were unimpressed by failure. They wrote letters to Lys and Mir and Volantis, asking if a coalition might be formed to encourage good order by force. Braavos wrote back, with fewer words than usual, and informed them that any coalition which arrived at Valyria with nets and stakes would find itself unable to count its ships accurately upon leaving. Qohor sent a crate of hinges with a note. These move best when not forced. Volantis found that its citizens had begun to learn to bathe without priests telling them when to pour water, and was suddenly shy of sending soldiers to seize bathhouses whose coin taxes were pleasant. Mir proposed inventing a new net and was told by the women of Valyria that if they wished to contribute, they might instead invent a way to remove the smell of burnt onion from a tired man's beard without losing the onion. He went home at last, for a season, because even work that thinks itself necessary must bow to the necessity of being a person in a place. He chose to be present for small harvests. He sat under the tree in the yard at evening and listened to what the wind was arguing with the leaves. He oversaw nothing. The work oversaw itself. The men of the yard corrected their grip because it felt better, not because he told them. The kitchens sent less smoke up the chimneys because the stoves were happy. Children ran across the flagstones to the baths and back again, bare feet slapping, and did not get sick as often in winter. In the nights came dreams of the white cave and the knot, not as commands but as reminders. Once he dreamed that the woman who had been a city came and sat at his fire as if she had walked through a wall. She chewed a piece of bread and said, "It is good." And then, "They are still tying knots." He nodded. "They will," she said, "forever. Your work is not to cut them all. It is to show knives how to lay themselves down and become spoons when the table asks it." She leaned forward and touched Ghost's head. "The wolves are doing well." He woke with the taste of good bread and good advice in his mouth. In the south, a king tried to take credit for peace. He failed because his people had learned this new grammar where merit was the thing you did and not a crown you wore. In the north, a woman opened a school to teach listening, not as sorcery but as craft. Men brought their boys to learn how to build a stove that would not sulk, and a fence that would flex in the wind, and a path across a bog that would remind you of your pride when your foot went in a little deeper than you liked. The tutors that remained taught too, and sometimes their songs were sweet enough to live in the world without trying to boss it. The tutor of tutors grew thin and equal parts beautiful and frightening. She built 3 cages in 3 cities and dismantled them herself before dawn because she found she could not bear the breathlessness of a bound hill, any more than she had been able to bear the breathlessness of a bound girl in her father's house. Sansa wrote letters that were laws only when men needed to be reminded to keep their promises after the story had cooled. She sent white cloth to Valyria and sent back a little coin to Qohor when a shipment of hinges saved a barn from making a widow of a woman who had already mourned enough. She told Jon, when he worried about whether the world expected him to appear in person in this city or that the world would survive without his profile cut against a horizon for a while. "You have made a kind of weather," she said. "Men will dress for it." Davos learned the accounts of men with banners and taught the accounts of men with boats. He found a way to break a Volantene merchant's stranglehold on good steel by showing 3 Myrish smiths how to share a clause without cheating each other. He swore more, perhaps, than a knight should swear. He used less vinegar and more salt. He became a man to whom many wrote letters and from whom many received hard, short answers that proved to be kind when the season turned. Timur went home to Qohor and returned with a woman whose laugh could have sharpened a blade without a stone. They set up a forge on the edge of a river in a town that hadn't had a name and now called itself Two Hammers. They made wedding gifts for men who did not think they could be forgiven and hinges for doors that had been slow to open. Timur wrote a letter once to the tutor of tutors, enclosed with a little piece of metal not fit for anything. In the letter he wrote only, "I am learning to begin again." She did not answer with words. She sent back a small cage, perfect, and a note pinned to it. Do not use. Remember, Maesterless disappeared into the world in the way only boys who have chosen their classrooms can. He sent a note from a mountain village in the west saying he had taught old men how to line their stoves with ground glass and that one had said thank you by giving him an egg and a parable. He sent a drawing of a cabbage that had needed a rope to bring to table. He sent a handful of black sand with the instruction to put it in the pockets of men who were too sure of their balance. The year turned and turned again. The cords hummed across water in places men had called dead. In Valyria, the fig tree's roots found a channel and drank. A dragon learned to sleep on its back. In the north, men learned to leave their wells unlocked and found that no one had stolen their water. In the east, the last of the old cages rusted into a memory, and the last of the tutors who thought obedience was an altar found that mercy had taught his hands to tremble too much for tying knots none needed. One winter a wind came down out of the mountains with more bitterness than habit. It made men fear that the old cold had been waiting for a chance to return and had found an excuse. The cords held. The stoves held. The bath steamed. Children stood in doorways and warmed their toes and were chased away by mothers who knew love sometimes wears the apron of efficiency. Ghost grew gray about the muzzle and slept more heavily and woke with a start when the snow slid off a roof in the night. John watched a boy with ears too large for his head teach a dragon not to be afraid of its own reflection in a window for the first time, and he realized he was old enough to be grateful for such stories without needing to be in them. The tutor of tutors came to Winterfell in spring. She walked into the yard with a stride that had lost none of its opposition and asked for water. She drank. She sat on a bench and put her forehead to her palms and laughed. The laugh was not angry. It was raw with relief. "You were right," she said, then said, "No, that is the wrong grammar. You were kind and I was proud. I am learning to be kind." He did not have a sentence to redeem her with. He offered her bread instead. She bit into it and made the small noise that people make when their mouths admit an idea their mind is still fighting. "I will go to Valyria," she said. "I will ask the city to tell me a story about what it used to call itself when no one was listening." "Take Ghost," John said. "He is good with stories that do not end where they began." The tutors became teachers. The teachers did not become saints. Men failed and were forgiven and sometimes were not. A man in the Riverlands tied a cage around a spring because he loved the feeling of its obedience. He died in summer of a fever no cage could have prevented. A woman in the Reach learned to speak softly to a ridge and saved a village in a year of too much water. Her name did not travel because she did not care whether it did. A boy in the Vale discovered a cave that made a sound when he sang. He sang to it every evening until he married, and then every third evening thereafter when his wife reminded him it would not feed babies, and the cave did not mind. On a day when the light over the yard at Winterfell was forked by passing cloud, light that wanted to be general and found itself sculpted into particular, Sansa came to him with a letter in her hand. "From Old Town," she said, "from a man who thinks himself special because he never married his mind to a master and is therefore free to be wrong without witnesses." He took the letter, recognizing the iron nail of Marwyn's script. The mage wrote of a new interpretation of old maps that suggested more cords lay under places no one had bothered to look because they had not smelled of sulfur. He wrote of ice not just in caves but under plains, of heat not just under mountains but under a farmer's field that felt soft underfoot. He wrote of a woman in Asshai who had stopped painting her face with grief and started painting doors with mercy, and of a boy in the shadow who had taught his village that sometimes the safest place to be during an argument was out of the way of the words. John showed Sansa the part about the cords under fields. "He wants us to survey every inch of ground between Winterfell and the Wall," he said. "He wants his name on a map," Sansa said. "He wants to keep the world from being surprised," he said. She laughed. "You have achieved the opposite. What are you going to do?" He looked out at the yard where boys were being corrected by men who had learned to mind their own pride. He looked toward the Godswood where Ashara's circles hung new and bright, and where sometimes in the afternoon she would be heard singing lines that sounded like pity and were in fact practice. He thought of fig trees and cabbage heads and stoves and bathhouses and hinges, of dragons that slept with their bellies up, of mountains that had stopped counting in obedience and started counting in curiosity. He thought of the tutor of tutors walking toward a city that would forgive her only to the extent that she forgave herself. He thought of a boy he had been who had needed commands because he did not know where to put his hands. "We will go and listen to the fields," he said. "We will ask them if they like being counted. And if they do not, we will let them teach us how to count." "Good," Sansa said. "I will write to Old Town and tell them that the North finds their proposal interesting and will proceed to do as it judges best." He laughed, leaned into her kiss, and later that afternoon saddled a horse and rode out beyond the last ditch. The wind carried the smell of a thaw that had decided to be serious. Ghost loped alongside, no longer needing to prove anything by being first. A field is not a mountain. It has no dramatic throat with which to speak. It has no shoulder with which to shrug. It has patience and a conversation with rain that has been going on longer than men have dared call themselves stewards. He walked its length in silence with Ashera and 3 farmers whose names and hands were both hard. He came back and sat on the stone by the ditch and put his palms flat on the ground, not as a prayer but as a greeting. The field did not answer in words, but with a series of small gestures. The way a clod loosened from itself and fell apart on his palm. The way water refused to sit in a hollow and instead found its own path. The way the wind combed the stubble and left it lying as if to say, "This is how I like to be touched." Ashera listened more surely than he did. She showed him where his hearing caught on habit and where it could be smoothed. They set no cords under the field. They put in a few drains lined with broken black glass and curved them into a shape that fit the land's side. They piled stone where stone wanted to be to make a low wall that did more good than a high one would have. They taught a boy to listen to the way a spade says wait when it strikes something that is not ready. In the summer, the field was generous. In the winter, it did not harden into resentment but rested, which is to say it prepared for the next conversation. From the east came less news of cages and more of schools. The teachers went to Valyria and learned to tell stories without needing to be the heroes in them. Even in Volantis, there were men who discovered they preferred baths that steamed reliably to sermons that steamed unreliably, and began to ask their priests to end their prayers with thank you instead of amen. From Ass High, a letter arrived with the ink smelling faintly of a spice no one could name. It spoke of shadows being taught not to frighten children, and of the living being taught not to frighten shadows. It asked, could someone send hinges? The children of men who had been boys when the correction began grew up. They married and did not care to be told whether their unions would please the gods. They learned to strike a bargain with weather and the small gods of kitchens. They learned to leave doors unlocked because their neighbors had bread and would share it if asked correctly. They learned to be bored and grateful, and sometimes both. On a day when the air was golden with the exhaustion of late summer, John walked out to the bathhouse at the edge of the low hill where once they had wrapped 3 bodies and taught his lungs to take steam like a tonic. He lay back against the stone and looked at a sky he had earned the right to call common. A dragon slid across it like a punctuation mark in a sentence so long it made scholars grumble. Beside him floated a little lily whose petals opened and closed as men stood in the water and told stories. Someone was telling one now about a horn and a wolf and a mountain, and John smiled and closed his eyes and did not correct it. Afterward, he sat on the steps with his feet in the pool and watched a child draw circles on the wet stone with finger and saw them evaporate and smiled because he knew that each circle had been a vow and each evaporation a lesson about holding lightly. Ashera came to sit beside him, skin glowing with the satisfaction of having worked and sweat and rested. "They are still tying knots," she said. "Always," he said. "They are still untying them," she said. "Always," he said. "We are very small," she said, and the joy in her voice made it a hymn. "We are very many," he said, and that made it comfort. Winter would come and with it a kind of silence. Then spring would return, not because a man with a horn commanded it, but because the world enjoys being itself. Men would die horribly and without warning, and be mourned. Children would be born and be ridiculous. Women would run cities while men believed they were keeping them safe. Mountains would grumble. Dragons would fly not like omens, but like birds who love their body's cleverness. Fields would gossip with rain. Chords would hum. Stoves would mind their tempers. Forges would learn to pray and then forget and then remember again. On a night years later, when the first silver lines had threaded John's hair and Ghost dreamed and woke with a small bark at foolishness remembered, he sat up in bed and knew the dream had not been only a dream. He walked into the yard. The sky was velvet and whole. The cord over the little river hummed so gently you could not hear it unless you laid your ear to the stone of the bridge. He lay his ear there. He listened. The sound was not a note but a sentence. It said, "I am here." He whispered back, "So am I." He stood and watched the darkness be itself for a while. He thought of a boy in black with a sword and an honor he did not yet know what to do with, of a man with a crown he had refused and a death he had failed to keep, of a city that had once told the mountains to kneel and had learned to stand instead. He thought of all the small things that keep a world from breaking. Hinges that fit, doors that open, vows that bend, hands that put themselves to work and then wash themselves and break bread. Far to the south, a woman who had once taught cages to sing walked through a square in Valyria and heard a dragon snore with the squeak of a cartwheel in need of oil and laughed so hard she had to sit down on a step and catch her breath. Far to the east, a boy in the shadow folded a paper boat and put it into a basin warmed by a cord and watched it drift and believed in a world that was not trying to kill him. Far to the west, on a coast so windy men learned to walk with their heads tilted, a farmer planted his field in lines that pleased the mountain and then went home and told his wife all about it, and she kissed his brow and said, "Simple things first, you great poet." And under the mountains that had once been bound and then had been furious and then had been courted, the counting went on. It was not the count of orders obeyed nor of grudges nursed. It was the count of breaths shared, of small eruptions that fed the fields, of channels that carried warmth without ownership, of cracks that sighed and then quieted, of listening that made language. It was the count of a sentence that could finally be finished and then begun again for pleasure rather than fear. It was the count of the world's patience, and of men trying and failing and apologizing, and trying again until their trying became a habit called peace.